In this video, I'll be making some new jaws for a vise that I've just recently restored as part of another video. It's a record 52.5p, and the jaws I'm going to make are going to have some dog holes in them to work in conjunction with my new MFT top. That was also a recent video, and I'll link to both of those below in the description box. I'm going to be using a piece of sapele to make the jaws. It's a hardwood, so it'll be nice and durable. The jaws on my other vise though were just made from some block board, which is laminated pieces of pine with a veneer on both faces. And that's actually held up pretty well for the past few years, so you don't necessarily need to use hardwood for this, but it is a good choice. I started by ripping some clean edges onto the workpiece at the table saw. This piece was rough sawn and it was quite warped too, so I used the planer to get one face flattened. Then I could thickness plane the opposite face to get the piece to a consistent thickness. You can see from this footage here that I had to remove quite a lot of shavings to get this piece flat. I trimmed one end at the miter saw, and then I could cut the workpiece in half to give me two pieces that are just about long enough for the two jaws. I wanted one of my jaws, the front jaw, to be about 25mm thick so that I can later add the dog holes to it. The other jaw, the rear jaw, didn't need to be so thick, so I ended up thickness planing that down to about 15mm. I then ripped each jaw down to its final width. The vise had all four of its original jaw mounting screws with it, and I'd used two of those to secure the back jaw to the vise. So here I'm marking up the spacings, and then I drilled out the holes at the pillar drill using an 8mm bit. I then used a spade bit to widen the opening of those holes to create a bit of clearance for the heads of the screws, and then I could secure the back jaw in place. I then offered up the front jaw to position it level with the back jaw, and I tightened the vise to hold it in place. I drilled some pilot holes, and then I could use the mounting holes at the front to secure the front jaw in place. I mainly secured it from the front rather than using the original jaw mounting screws, because those screws wouldn't have been quite long enough to hold this jaw in place. I did some final refinements using a hand plane to get the top of the jaws flush with one another. And I also wanted to make sure that they were sitting perfectly level with the tabletop, so I used a straight edge to check. I added a slight bevel to the edges with a block plane just to soften them, and I checked that they were opening and closing nicely, and it looked great. To mark up the dog holes, I offered up a speed square to try to line up the centre of the new holes with the existing holes on the MFT top. It didn't matter if they were lined up perfectly, but I wanted to get them close. And then I eyeballed and marked up a centre point. I used a 20mm auger bit to drill the holes. This is the same bit that I used to drill the holes in the MFT top, and I know that my bench dogs and accessories all fit these holes perfectly. And I'm making sure to hold the drill so that I'm drilling the holes as plumb as possible. I didn't bother using a guide this time because it's not really necessary that it's perfect, but it does need to be close. To finish the jaws, I decided to use some hard wax oil that I had left over from a recent job. This is nice and hard wearing, and it will also darken and bring out the grain of the sapele to make it look pretty. I applied it thinly with a cotton cloth. Hard wax oil is always best applied really thinly so it fully absorbs into the wood, and after two thin coats it looked great.
Hello.
Adding these dog holes to the vise is going to be really handy for holding wider boards for things like planing and sanding. When a workpiece is too wide to fit into the vise, the solution I used to use was to make use of these square dog holes that I added to my old workbench. I have a video about how I made those, and I'll link to that in the description box below. And that works okay if you're planing in one direction, but for things like sanding, it's best to have the workpiece held at both ends rather than just one end. So the new jaws are going to allow me to add some dogs both to the jaw, and then whatever dog holes on the tabletop are best positioned depending on how long or wide the board is to fully secure the workpiece in place, so that I can then do whatever I need to do, planing, chiseling, sanding, whatever. I think it's going to be a really useful addition. That's it for this one. Sorry this week's video was so short, but that's because I'm still working on the new miter station at the moment, and that build will be covered in future videos once it's finished. Please subscribe for more weekly woodworking videos. You can also support the channel on Patreon, where you can get early access to my videos, free plans and cut lists, exclusive content, and a name credit at the end of my videos. You'll find a link to that in the description box. And by the way, I've also recently added a PayPal donation option at the request of some people who'd like to show their support but would rather not sign up to Patreon. And there's a link to that below too. Thanks for watching.